a second. Going to give it one more minute for individuals who are coming from other Zoom calls to Zoom across the virtual hall and come to what I feel is the most important Zoom call meeting of my entire life. And I want to be sure that everyone has the opportunity to join in to the joy that I have. I also want to thank Michael from the Pnrc office and Shelly from the Pnrc office for doing amazing work in regards to this conference. It's been great to have them facilitating all of this for us, and I want to be sure to let them know that we do not take this lightly. So a minute is all I had to spare, and we're going to get started. But before we start, I want us to all take a second, and I didn't get the chance to do this, and Sunny and Andy know I'm going to do this, but we're going to take a moment of silence, and I want you to take your moment of silence for all of the struggles that you're going through, for all of the Black lives that were lost, for all of the undocumented citizens, for our veterans, from whomever you would like to recognize as we dive into this discussion. And we want to recognize the traditional spaces that we live in, especially in association with those of the indigenous peoples here, both of parts of northern Mexico and up through Alaska. Like I said, I'm not trying to be woo-woo or anything like that, but I believe that there are so many people across all colors, across everything, that have contributed to our success, and I think it's important as we dive in. So just take a moment. I'm only going to give you a moment of just complete silence. Okay, I want to thank you for joining me. We're going to dive right in. So today I have both Sunny Shaw and Andy Rodriguez, and how this is going to happen is that if you have any questions that you would like me to ask, go ahead and put it in the chat. But I asked Sunny and Andy to be unfiltered in this conversation. And if you don't know them, they're some of the realest, most practical, smartest people that I know. And I asked them to bring all of that, both heat and fire, to this conversation so we could get to know how they got about moving up in Nahro, their journey, their experience, their leadership, and what they see for the future. So we're going to dive right in. What I would like, and I'm going to start with Andy, is just to kind of self-describe who you are and why this work matters, and then what motivates you and what gives you a spark. We'll start with Andy, and then we'll go to President Shaw. Andy.
Hey, who I am, I'm a farm kid that grew up on my dad's dairy. What identifies me with that was the years that I spent alongside my dad and my mom building up the place. I recall about a 6-month period where we had to put all our resources into the dairy. And so my father and I slept in a 14-foot camper while my mom went to go live with my grandma for a bit because it was wintertime. And so if you know anything about Idaho and South Central Idaho, it gets really cold there. And if you think about 11-year-old boy out there with his dad working 24/7 on a dairy, because that's how it goes, that's what I did. That's who made me me. And learning how to work was working alongside my dad there. We also had to sacrifice. Mom and dad were able to finally purchase a double-wide trailer, but they couldn't put a septic in because, again, all the resources had to go into the dairy. So that was purchasing cattle, machinery upgrades, and things like that. So for 6 months, you know, there's things that don't stop. For example, this is going to sound gross, but going to the bathroom doesn't stop. And so we had to figure out ways to do that. And what's funny is the dairy, you know, we think, I know some of the city folks may not get this, but, you know, dairy cattle, when they have to go to the bathroom, they just go. And it's a dirty area, but that dairy had to be pristine because why? Because you don't want milk that's contaminated. So it has to be pristine. And so we had to, my mom fashioned this little metal chair thing that we used as a bathroom outside in the wintertime. And that little bit of sacrifice that we went through built a career for my dad that lasted 23 years, and I think it was well worth it. But what motivates me in this work is seeing that what we're going to do is going to have a major effect on a family. I'm lucky in that I work for a small organization, so I get to meet every one of our families when they move in, and I actually do an orientation with them so that they know what my expectations are of them as a tenant. And I'll come back to that here in a minute, and what they can expect from me as a landlord. A tenant is somebody who pays you rent. We like to call our tenants residents because that means that's someone in your care. And we start the whole process with an orientation that I personally give to them, talking about the expectations, but also talking to them about our family self-sufficiency program and how we have a program out there that can truly make them self-sufficient. And that can change the lives of their children, their children's children, their children's children's children, and probably great-great-grandchildren that they'll never meet. But that has an impact. Just buying a home and being a homeowner has that big of an impact. And so we like to start there with that foundation to make sure that they understand this is something that you too can achieve. And it fits right in with our motto at Nampa Housing Authority of move in, move up, and move on. Move in because you need us. Move up, get that education that you are looking for, or get the management position you're looking for, and move on, which I like to tell them, get on out of here, because the person that is waiting in line right now is waiting for you to move on. And so we want you to do that part and be a part of that. So that's what motivates me. And when I look for staff to hire here, I want to hear their stories, and I want to hear that perhaps they were impoverished themselves too. Maybe they didn't have to go through the extremes I did, but that they knew suffering along the way too, because that's going to make them empathetic to the families that we serve. So that's something I always look for. And by the way, I don't hire my staff hires staff. And so I empower them to do that because I know they're going to figure out what kind of teammate they want and how they're going to get there. And so I'll stop there, Cupid, if that's good.
Yeah, that's good. Great. Thank you, Andy. And I'll have some follow-up questions. So I want to hand it over to President Sunny Shaw.
Wonderful. Thank you, Cupid. And so Andy and I have grown up in housing, I think, together. Our careers have really followed each other's paths as we've grown up. So empathy. To me, empathy is incredibly important in this work. And so what helped me to become empathetic, like Andy, it was a lot of my childhood. I think a lot of you have heard about it. And so I kind of sometimes sound like a broken record. But you may or may not know, but there was a thing called railroad housing that employees of the railroad could live in as part of their salary. And so that's what I grew up in. And although we weren't necessarily a family in poverty, our family struggled with addiction. I had a parent that struggled with addiction issues. And because of that, we had symptoms of poverty. And so, you know, I've said before, I know what government cheese tastes like, and actually it's pretty good. I really miss it. I understand billing cycles of utility companies because I knew as a child what it would mean when I saw pink paper in the window of our power bill and that someone needed to wake up fast and pay it. Otherwise, there weren't going to be lights on in the house. We also didn't have indoor plumbing. We had an outhouse and we had a bathtub which hung on the side of that house. And so it was a little bit embarrassing as a child, you know, going outside and going to the outhouse and waving at people as they were driving into town because our house sat right on the outskirts of town. So it is an understanding of poverty. It is an understanding that gives you empathy. And do you have to come from poverty to have empathy? No, you don't. But it certainly does give you a different picture of it. And so I think that is what kind of started to light this fire for me, caring for other people. And as the first day that I walked into the housing authority that I was working at, and I started as a receptionist, that first day I was like, wow, I found home, because I knew that I could impact the children that were living in households that we were going to be serving. For me, it's always been about those kiddos and that roof. And so there I started as a receptionist and have worked my way up because of this work. What motivates me? Seeing progress, knowing that we're changing lives, that this is important work, knowing that things can be better, and that I can have a role in helping things to be better, not just for my agency, not just for my community, but most importantly for our families. You know, those kiddos letting them have a bit of a chance at a better future. So that's really what lights my fire and drives me in this work that we do.
Thank you, Sunny, and thank you, Andy. You know, I think that there's going to be a lot of people on this call who can relate to that experience and to where each of you is coming from, saying that, you know, like, I didn't come from the best background, but I'm here now. And that leads me to my next question. And I'm going to break this down a little bit. So I want to start with you, Sunny, and then we can hand it over to Andy. With the first question, there are many people who are starting, and they start as the receptionist. Tell how you started and how you went about your journey to be where you're at right now. And I mean, you could, because I'm going to follow up with some questions like, did you have managers that sucked? And things like that, because people want to know that. And I know that some of them are going to be dealing with that. So let's start with you, Sunny, just really specifically, how did you get to your position? First at your housing authority and second at Nahro. And then Andy, the same question to you. So you can just follow her up when she's done.
So at my housing authority, you know, honestly, I was looking for a job. I was managing a veterinary practice. I hadn't gotten an increase in salary for 3 years. And that was a management decision I'd made. It was the right thing for the organization, but I was just looking for a job. I wasn't looking to be a houser. A lot of us that are in housing don't say, you know, when we were 8, hey, I want to grow up and be in housing. But what happens is when you walk in that door on that first day, it grabs your heart. And that's when housers stay, is when it grabs your heart. So yeah, I started as a receptionist, and I had a boss over our organization that saw something in me, and she gave me opportunity. So really, that's kind of a starting point, is that, you know, you work hard, you earn trust of folks, and hopefully someone will see that and give you opportunity. So I was given opportunity. I advanced in that organization as far up as I could go. And then there was a position that opened a couple hours away to become an executive director. And I talked to my boss and I said, hey, do you think that I could do this? And she goes, yeah, it's just what you already do, except on steroids. Little did I know that it was a lot of steroids that it's on, but it is a big job. But yeah, she believed in me, and so I did it. And she's continued to be a mentor to me. So I've been really blessed when you can find a mentor. Sometimes it's not the person in your organization. You know, let's face it, sometimes there's not somebody in your organization that's going to give you opportunity to grow. But find a mentor, that person that's going to believe in you and work to provide pathways for your career to develop and grow. Oh, and she just jumped on, Lisa. So how did I advance in Nahro? Again, she gave me opportunity in Nahro. At first said, yeah, you can serve at the state level. I don't see anything wrong with that. And then let me serve at the regional level, and had no reason really to allow me to serve at the regional level, except for I think maybe she believed in me. And after I came to my own organization, by then I had grown my leadership. Nahro is a great place to develop leadership. At the state, you know, you don't have to really travel that much. At the regional level, you get a little bit more into it. And then at the national level, you have this opportunity to rub shoulders with people from all across the country, to learn from them, to challenge and grow your own leadership abilities. So it provides really, really great opportunity. So I started serving at the state level in Nahro, and then the regional, and then the national. And it did end up leading to this beautiful opportunity to have ran for senior vice president and now president, and leading us during this very, very interesting time. But yeah, you know, in housing, Cupid, I've not had a sucky boss in housing. I've had a couple really difficult coworkers, really, really difficult coworkers. And I may have even on occasion been the sucky boss.
That, Sunny, hold that. We're going to get to that, because I think we're going to get to that. I have some follow-up questions, but let's go and hand it over to Andy.
I'd like to think my journey started when I was a kid, because before my mom and dad got the dairy, my parents were union organizers, and they worked on a lot of things like political campaigns and organizing unions. And my dad was really involved in organizing a farm worker community-based organization. And so I got to see that when I was little, and I knew that it was expected of me as a child that I would be there helping. I'd sit by my dad while he would be in meetings, or I'd go knock on doors. I remember knocking on doors for a gentleman who was running for the state legislature. His mom, or his wife, was my den mom. And for no other reason than my mom wanted me to be out there knocking on doors. So I was out there with her doing that. But it was that kind of thing that led me to believe in a sense of community and giving back and that sort of thing. I actually started my journey in housing as a commissioner. I was on the Caldwell Housing Authority Board of Commissioner for, I think it was about 9 years before I became a director myself. I was on that commission because I wanted to try to help the farm worker community that lived there to have a better life out there. The director that was there, unfortunately, was very racist, very undermining of the people that worked there and his staff. So it was my pleasure to come on as a commissioner to try to get rid of him and bring on some new blood that had racial equality in mind and had the idea that just because I'm the boss doesn't mean that I'm king. And so I stayed on that board even after I became a director, much to that executive director's demise. He didn't like that. And he didn't like that I was learning the inside of the business and how that worked. But I didn't even want to apply for this job. I had just left a community-based organization because of a boss who really sucked. And I'll tell you all about that. But I just left a job. I had a little car dealership that I used as kind of to get play money so I could golf and go fishing and do other things. And so I was sitting on my car lot one day, and this coworker of mine, or ex-coworker of mine, came over and said, "Andy, you need to apply for this job." And he put down some papers for a executive director job at Nampa Housing Authority. I'd always aspired to become a director, but I never thought I would, given the situation that I had just left. So I told him, "Terry, I'm done with people. Let me just sell people cars and let me just do that. Leave me be." So about a month goes by and he comes back and he says, "Andy, you need to apply for this job." And I said, "But you didn't hire anybody yet?" They said, "No, the right person hasn't come along. We're waiting for you." And when he said that to me, it turned something over in me. I don't know if it was the calling at that point, but I said, "Let me look into this." So before Google became a thing, I don't remember what we used to use for search engines, but I typed in Nampa Housing Authority on my keyboard. And up comes this thing: Office of the Inspector General finds major findings at Nampa Housing Authority. Executive director has been fired. Board of Commissioners have been asked to resign. Members have been asked to stay on while others were asked to leave. And I'm like, holy cow, that place is a mess. And so I got to thinking about it, talked to my wife about it, and I said, "You know what, I'm going to put in for it." So I was on my way to Reno for a car dealership auction to go try to buy some more vehicles for my lot. And I decided, well, what can it hurt? So I put in my name, and 17 years later, this has been my passion and my calling. And I absolutely love what I do. This isn't a job to me. It wasn't a job from day one. There were a lot of hurdles that we went through along the way, and I don't know if you want me to touch on that later, but there was a lot of things that needed to be fixed here. And as it so happened, when you're a near troubled housing authority with a score of 72, and you're about to be taken over by another agency because the management wasn't working there, you really can't screw that up much more. So I was pleased to come in and help with that.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Sonny and Andy. So what they're telling me is that we just need to all apply, and our next application might be the one for all those future housing authority directors out there. So yeah, we're going to dive deeper into that. And Sonny, I want to direct this question to you because, you know, we first started off saying, okay, how did you get here? But we know that you had to navigate unhealthy coworkers or bosses or workspaces, or there's political considerations that you have to give, even though we're supposed to be apolitical. How did you navigate that? Because I feel like from all the emerging and established and growing leaders that are on this call, they're going to want to know how you and how Andy look at how you navigate those spaces, whether it's in a space with a coworker or a boss or someone, a local elected or a developer. How do you navigate that? What was your experience with that? And I'll start with you, Sonny.
Okay, so like I said, I have been blessed in my early housing career with a really fabulous boss, but I have had difficult coworkers, and I do acknowledge that sometimes I'm probably also not the great boss too. But one of the first questions I always ask myself is, did I do something to get us in this situation? Because a lot of times it's easy for us to push blame onto someone else. So we need to, first of all, take a look in the mirror and say, did I do something to contribute to this? And if so, then I'm going to take ownership on that and try to work through it. If I didn't do anything, those are still a lot of times situations that we face where it's like, I did nothing to bring this on. And situations still need to be managed. What I've always found best is to go to the person I have the issue with, if it's a coworker, to try to resolve the issue, because no boss likes to be entangled in babysitting of staff. So that's really proactive, is if you are able to resolve the issue yourself. Now, if it's something and I say, I don't know how to resolve this, the first bit of advice I'm going to give all of you, I don't know about if you're the same, but I can be very emotional and very reactionary. And so we've got to remove emotion from situations so that we can assess them clearly for what they are and what the facts are. And I find that really helpful when I'm doing the did I have a role to play in this, helping me to be honest with, is some of it my fault or not? And so I've actually, Cupid, even before I was in housing, I had a boss that would scream at me regularly about this far from my face. And that person being the boss, I mean, what are you going to do? You're just going to be like, okay, I'm going to work on it. It made me tough. But there's just sometimes situations where, if it can be fixed, great. And I know that some of you on the call, sometimes if it can't be fixed, then you need to be, fine tuning your resume and then getting yourself ready for that next opportunity. Sometimes that is the best resolution, is to prepare for the next opportunity, in my opinion.
Thanks, Sunny. Andy?
Okay, so I think you asked a question about what barriers we had. As an agency, our barriers were all internal. We had a director who at the time just wasn't involved. He was dealing with some mental health issues. I don't know the particulars of it, but from what I've heard from the staff that were here. But what we did have that was an asset was the staff that was here. They ran the agency without a director for several months because he just wasn't showing up to work. And so I saw that leadership in them, and I knew that I had a good team who really cared about what they did, but they were lacking leadership. And so it didn't take much to tear down barriers. We had a housing authority that was crime-ridden, gang-ridden, drug-ridden, you name it, it had it. And in fact, when I finally met with the chief of police to tell him I need help cleaning this place up, he laughed at me first. And then when he saw I was serious, he said, I'll assign you a guy. And for the past 17 years, I've been working with this gentleman to help me clean out the housing authority. It took about 2 years to get rid of the really bad elements of it. But then after that, it was smooth sailing. But I still utilize him when I have an issue with a resident who sneaks under the radar and starts to do bad things. It's been invaluable to have that resource with me. In fact, one of the detectives that I'd known since I was a child, he actually talked about how police wouldn't come into the units by themselves. They'd have to come in 2 cop cars at a time, usually 4 men or 4 police officers would come in at the same time. And so that's how bad it was. But we had a great asset in the staff. Navigating an unhealthy coworker, I looked at that and I thought about a gentleman I worked for who saw potential in me when I was a mid-level manager and brought me into the executive management team as his heir apparent. And so for the first 5 years that I worked a year and a half in the Magic Valley, which is about 2 hours from where I live now. But I was kind of like my own guy out there, and they let me do my job. And when they brought me back to what's called the central office, I worked very closely with him. And I will say, I got a lot of opportunities that I otherwise wouldn't have had by him seeing potential in me. But unfortunately, when I started working more closely with him, I saw that his moral compass wasn't the same as mine. And for my professional sake, I needed to get away from that. And so I had an issue with him at a point where there was an unethical matter that I needed to bring before the board. Now, bear in mind, I'm not the executive director. So that's suicide to your career when you do that. But I felt like it was the right thing to do. And if I was going to cut the relationship, that was the cleanest way to do it. And so I prepared my report, sort of became a whistleblower of sorts. And then that Friday, as they left for their board meeting, I began to pack my bags all my personal stuff because I knew what Monday was going to hold. It wasn't a decision that was made lightly. I mean, there's a financial implication there, but there was more of a professional rapport that I was starting to build for myself. Bear in mind, I was in my mid-20s at the time. So I knew I had a lot of career ahead of me, and none of this stuff existed back then. But I decided that that was the best thing for me professionally. And once I did it and I got away from him, I was amazed at the number of people that told me, man, I don't know how you could have worked with that guy. You just didn't seem anything like him or the way his organization is run. And I said, well, I'm not. That's why I don't work there anymore. But it was a good experience for me, even though it had a sort of negative connotation. It built up my reputation in my community that is about 40% Latino. And at that time, our community was about 45,000 people. So not really great big community. So getting away from him really helped me by disassociating myself from him.
Sunny and Andy, thank you for those. And I see that there was some questions. Thank you, Vanessa, on the chat. We're going to have a time at 3 o'clock for all of those who would like to ask questions to the presenters directly. You will be able to. We might get to your questions during the conversation, but please be prepared to share on this call either your experience or some questions. We want to make sure that we're giving you the space to do that. So thank you. We see you. We will definitely make sure we have this space. And in following up, I have a follow-up question to what we were talking about. And I'm going to start with you, Andy, and then we'll give it to Sunny. And this is the thing. How do you continue, even from your position, to be a better leader? Like, what are you going through to make sure that during this time you're continuing to grow? And what advice would you give those on this call for them to continue, from your experience, from them to continue, and from the individuals that you have managed that you kind of said, you know what, they got it. What did they have, and what do you have to continue to grow and build?
Yeah, so you know, there's the old adages of, you know, never rest on your laurels, and always be prepared to reinvent yourself. But there's a lot of truth in that. You know, if you just sit back and say, what I've done is enough, it's time for you to get out of the way. That's the bottom line. We're a small agency. I have 142 units, no Section 8. We just did a RAD conversion on more than half of our properties, and I'll do a streamline conversion on the rest of the properties, and we're getting out of the HUD game. But it's things like that, and not being afraid to challenge your board to be visionaries, and be able to challenge your staff to be visionaries as well, that make you a better person for it, because you're changing along with it. You know, the after school program that you start, because kids are in the witching hour is what we call it here, where that 3 o'clock to 6 o'clock are the most dangerous hours for children, and gets them in trouble if they don't make it over to the Boys and Girls Club, or if they're not involved in some other sports or after school things. So the after school program that we created for our children, you know, that might be the difference between that child making it to the 3rd grade literacy level versus not making it. That may lead that child from either making it to the prison system or to Harvard. And so never be afraid to look at your programs and say, what can we do more than what we're doing now? The bingo program that we ran during normal times, it got our elders out so that they could be together and not have that sense of being alone, or that sense of dread of just being alone all day. And so it's things like that that I think help reinvent us as directors. And so I take a lot of time to reflect on that and see, okay, what can I do to do things better? And, you know, like if it's a work type relationship where it's just not working out, how can you try to fix it? And if you can't, what's best for the organization, and then dealing with it at that point.
Thank you, Andy, for that. Sunny?
Great. So how do I continue to grow myself personally? First of all, I agree with Andy. You can't rest on your laurels. What you did yesterday was yesterday. What are you going to do tomorrow? And you should always have a plan for what are you going to do tomorrow. That's how you change community, and that's how you change lives. The families that we serve, they're not counting on what we did yesterday. It matters what we're going to do tomorrow and how we're going to grow. And as far as you guys out there who are wanting to grow your leadership during these tough times, and it does address a little bit of Vanessa's question, is there are ways that you can grow your leadership without it having to be provided necessarily by your organization. Because at some point, an opportunity will come your way. And the question is, will you be ready for it? So there are things you can do in your community to develop leadership. I think last year when we presented a session, we talked about, getting on local boards, whether that's a United Way or a community action or, whatever there may be a board in your community, because you're going to learn, just like Andy did before he was even an executive director, you're going to learn how boards work. You're going to learn about budgets. You're going to learn about the things that you don't know about. That may not be an opportunity your agency can provide you, but that's a way you can ensure that you're going to continue to grow. I also believe that not knowing what we don't know, that's nobody's fault but our own. So we need to be book hungry. We need to be knowledge hungry. And it's up to us to expand our own knowledge and sources of information. So do that. Be reading, be a student, find a mentor. I think finding a mentor is really, really important for you because they can really help you to learn a pathway that's going to help your career to grow. But absolutely, just reiterating what Andy said, don't rest on what you did yesterday. It doesn't matter anymore. It's history. What are you going to do tomorrow to improve you and to improve your organization?
Thank you for that, Andy and Sunny. So for the next 15 minutes, we're really going to dive into why Nahro, right? This is Nahro 101, and there are some individuals who this might be their first time attending. We know that we try to encourage people to get activated around the work that they do and really look at this as a career. Like looking at it as a career, this is the organization that helps you develop you. What we want to know, and what I'm sure others want to know, was like, why do you think, Sunny, as president, someone should be a part of either the regional Nahro, if they have a state chapter, their state Nahro, or national Nahro? And then I'll ask Andy the same question. So let's start with that, Sunny. As national president, why should anyone even care about Nahro?
Sure. I mean, that's a legitimate question. And I'll tell you, Nahro is home for housers. Nahro is your home. And I was blessed with two great mentors that are, one of them I'm on the call with today, Andy and Lisa, who really led the way for me in Nahro. And, they kind of grabbed me by the hand and took me with them. And I'm grateful for that. So why Nahro? I started serving at the state level because, I couldn't go to Lisa and say, hey, start taking me to national conferences. But I wanted to learn. I wanted to learn about leadership. I wanted to learn about this organization. So I did it at the state, then the region, then nationally. But why? Why? I've always been a big believer in professional development, and Nahro is your home for professional development. Everything that you need, you can get certifications on in this organization right here, one-stop shop. I also love being able to be surrounded with people who are smarter than me. It may not be hard, but I like to be surrounded by people who are smarter than me, and Nahro's full of them. Just full of them. There's so many people that I can ask questions of. I've developed this strong network across the country that if I come across something that I've never done before, guess what? I have somebody I can call that can help me. Just this morning, we made the list of folks, of agencies that have been selected for Move to Work. I've been on the phone and been shooting emails. I need help. And I know a lot of smart people across this country because of Nahro that I can call on who can go ahead and help me. And honestly, it's going to be the place where you learn leadership. It's going to be the place where you learn how to advocate on behalf of your residents, which is the most critical thing that we can do. Nahro makes it easy and they teach you. So to me, it just makes natural sense that Nahro would be your home. They're your family.
Thank you for that. So Andy, I want to change up yours a little bit. I want to understand why you've continued to be a part of Nahro at the national level and the local level, along with what I asked President Sunny Shaw.
Okay. Well, right now I'm the Idaho State Chapter President, but it's been as bad a year for me as I'm sure, well, I can't even compare it to what my poor colleague Sunny's gone through. But we've not been able to do much with it. But I also serve at the local, regional, and national level, and I think it's important to be involved in all of those. In Nahro, I'm a current or a past vice president with portfolio, which means I was the chair of Member Services National. And that, to get there, you got to go all the way back to when I first started at the state chapter. I will say this may sound surprising and sort of counter what we're trying to do here, but I let my membership lapse. When I first started, we were a mess, like I mentioned earlier. And so everything I did was either at the local, or I dragged myself to a regional conference that was in Boise, and then started going to those a little more often. But I let my membership lapse because I wasn't getting any value from it. Bear in mind, this is way back. And the value I was seeking was questioned by the director at the Twin Falls Housing Authority at the time, Penny, who said, Andy, why are you letting your membership lapse? And I said, I'm getting no value out of it. She was like, what do you need to get value? At that time, we had all gone to a regional conference, and a bunch of the directors had been in this session that was meant to deal with mental health, we thought, but it was really more of a guy trying to sell some snake oil kind of stuff. And so a lot of us kind of snuck out of there. And as we snuck out, we found ourselves in the lobby waiting for the next concurrent session. And as we were in that hallway, we all sat around together, at least those of us from Idaho knew each other, sat down and did a little commiserating. Like, guess what happened to me? And guess what happened at my housing authority, which led to another story, which led to another story over here. And I said, that is value to me. So she said, how can we make this happen? And then I think Lisa was the president for the state chapter at the time. And we got together and started doing what were called roundtables. And we would get together and we would bring our staff to a central location, like in our case, it's Twin Falls, Idaho. And we would go and meet like at 10 in the morning so we could leave in the morning. And then we either did a day and a half or we just did a day, but we sat around and we just talked about stuff that was going on. And it made us that much tighter as a united front. So when we were dealing with the Fair Housing Council that is anything but fair, we were able to, at least as a group, say, no, we're united on this, and this is how we interpret the law. But that was the blossomings of that. I also was involved at the regional because I became state chapter president. That puts you automatically on the executive board for the regional council. And I will say that in those years, they discounted Idaho a lot. Because why? The big boys are there. You got Seattle, you got King County, you got Portland, you got Vancouver. What does a small agency like me know? Well, it turns out we know a lot. And we have to, because as a small agency, you've got to do everything. You know, we're known to say as small housers that if you're in a huge agency, you didn't know that there was a broken line in apartment such and such. If you're in a medium agency, you may have gotten a report, but if you're in a small agency, you know, because you were likely there helping to patch the work. So we're very involved. But at the regional level, we demanded and commanded that we be at the table and that they understand that we needed a place there. And so when national appointments were being made and stuff, when they would say, who volunteers? We'd raise our hand. And so that's how we got involved with that. I will say at the national level, I got thrust into that. There was a senior VP candidate who was going to go into the presidential candidate for the regional president. And some things happened, and I'm not going to get into that because it doesn't matter. But I was on the nominating committee to try to find his replacement. And one of the ladies who was on there too was from Moses Lake. And so we're talking about, well, who do you guys think? And one of them said, well, there's a guy on this that is on this call that I think would be good for it. And I was like, oh yeah, cool, who? And she said, you. And I said, what? She was like, I've seen how you've interacted with the board as a smaller agency and a smaller state, and you've been commanding respect from them in such a way that I think you should put in for it. So I didn't get to be a senior VP and then sit at the president's side and be able to learn from them. I got thrust right into the presidency, which then takes me to my very first Nahro national conference. And so when I went to my first national conference, I went to the first time attendee meetings. And somebody asked, who here, you know, it's everyone's first time. So who here is involved at your state chapter? So I raised my hand. Who here is involved in regional? And I raised my hand and a few others, but not as many as the first time. And then he got to the question of who here is involved in national leadership? And I raised my hand. And the director at the time kind of looked a little cross-eyed going, how's that? Well, it turned out because I was the regional president, I then automatically went to the Board of Governors. And then I served on member services where I've served for, gosh, countless terms. And then I became their chair. And so but I never forgot to look back. And in Idaho, there are 9 housing authorities across the state. And so we get to recycle the presidents. And I don't know if it's Lisa's turn next or if it's Sunny's turn next, but one of us has got to take the next turn because there's only so many of us. But along the way, we're trying to develop folks too. And so I have staff that I try to get involved. So my current Idaho chapter treasurer is my finance manager. And so I'm trying to get others involved so that we can build up that leadership that's going to have to come in, because these silver hairs aren't getting any darker. And as they get lighter, my light at the end of the tunnel that is retirement becomes more and more something that I can see.
I agree with everything, Andy, except for that last line. You're going to be here forever. We're not. So that was great. We're going to spend a couple more minutes on this issue. What I really want to ask now is that, so everyone's heard your journey. As leaders, there are individuals on this call who are like, yeah, I can do that. I want to do that. How do I convince my boss to let me go be a part of something knowing that our financial resources are strained? Like, I hear what you guys are saying, like I'm all for the whole movement. I want to be involved, yet I'm kind of intimidated because like I don't have any weight to bring to the conversation. What would you suggest? And then I'll give my reflections at the end. So Andy, let's start with you, then we will go to President Sunny Shaw.
I think it's a no-brainer, but there is a cost associated with it, unfortunately. First thing you do is you do like Sunny and you get involved at the local level and you show through your leadership style that you have something that's worth investing in. And I think that's what Lisa saw in Sunny, and that's why Sunny got catapulted up to the national level. But it's an investment. I mean, when COVID hit, we had 2-year-old computers. Nobody had a laptop except for our conference room right behind me. And so we weren't ready for it. But then we invested in laptops and invested in docking stations. Investing in people is no different. And as a director, if I had someone come up to me and say, I want to be involved at the national level, I'd shut them down immediately because I want them to earn their stripes at the local level and the regional level and show me that they should be at the national level. Because I would then be able to experience with them what it's like to go to a round table and have them sit there and be a part of that and actually participate. And I could actually see them at a little later on at the regional level, either on the executive board committee or on the planning committee for this conference, or somewhere where I'm seeing the sparks of light shining from them to then be able to say, yeah, you got what it takes, and I'm going to catapult you to the national. Look, I'm a small agency. I have to attend 3 conferences a year. Well, used to. You know, we would have to go to the DC conference, we would have to go to the summer conference, and we would have to go to the national conference because we are part of leadership. And when I say have to, it's not because Nahro makes you, it's because I make me. Because if I'm not there, I'm doing a disservice to not just my region, but my state chapter as well. And so when one needs to be an active participant, because nothing's more bothersome than sitting at a Board of Governors meeting and knowing that it's the same 10 people that are going to do all the talking, and there's going to be a lot of people who just sit on the sideline because they need to be participating in order to be leaders, as far as I'm concerned. So if I saw somebody showing me that they had that drive in them, hey, I'd make the commitment. And maybe I personally couldn't go to a meeting, but I would send someone else if my budget didn't sustain it. But my board feels that this is a huge investment and it's well worth it because we have a voice in Washington, D.C. that represents me as a small agency and represents others that are big agencies, but they know that they represent us, the us being PNRC and our local chapters.
Thank you for that. President Sunny Shaw.
Yeah, I just really, Andy, I think you hit something on the head right there. And it was with saying that you need to be able to demonstrate that there's going to be value in investing in sending you to these meetings. They're expensive. And quite frankly, travel is one of the things that is looked at on audits. So I have to know that my agency is getting a return on that investment. And so what is it that you're going to be bringing back? Andy was exactly right again. If you're going to meetings, but you aren't speaking up, if you're going to meetings and you aren't actively engaged, then really it's just a title and it's just a trip. And I hate to say it like that, but that's the hardcore truth. And so I want to invest in folks that are going to be engaged, that are going to take the leadership and run with it. So how do you approach your agency if it's a small agency? Yeah, you start on the local level. And sometimes that may be that you're doing what Cupid had initially set up as an example, and you're speaking or leading emerging leaders that you're doing virtually. That's fabulous. And then bring something back to your agency. Each time you do something that is a leadership step, bring something back. Show how you are improving your agency based on that experience, because that's return on investment right there. So if you are, if you get to go to a national conference, learn something, bring it back. And don't just say it's an idea, work to implement it if approved. Don't just say, hey, here's an idea somebody else can work on. No, you step up, you implement it, you show leadership. All that's going to do is encourage that director to put you on the travel list for the next conference as well.
Thank you for that. As a part of my personal journey, this is my, I believe, 12th year in Nahro. But about 6 years ago, I switched jobs and I wasn't sure if I was going to be able to be a part of Nahro. And Sunny reached out to the agency director at the time because I had been told no. And she wrote a personal letter to them that got me back involved. And from there, I was able to be the secretary and the VP and now the president, and then I won the National Emerging Leaders Award, and I've been headhunted for several jobs, and I've grown my network. But I was like many of you, if you're thinking like this, like, how do I even get started? And how I got started was that I just went to, we had a state chapter at the time, but now it would be regional. And then I started going to some of the subcommittee meetings as time would allow, because you still have to do your practical work. But I was really committed to my own upward mobility and success. So I was looking for every opportunity, and we have those opportunities now. We definitely want some of those great thinkers to be a part of the conversations we've had, because it might not look like it, but Sunny and Andy have been carrying this work for so long, and we would love to see them continue to take, now we can't see it, Sunny. We would love to see them take more of a national role and lead. I think they've earned it, but they refuse to leave this organization without knowing it's in capable hands, and that's you all. So they've been working with me for probably the last, over a decade, believe it or not. Over a decade, those two have been working with me, and look how young I look. 10, like it's been 12 years, and we're still saying the same thing. So we have some new leaders, and it's not an age thing, it's a desire thing. We want to know that you're committed. We have the space. Vanessa Sanchez is on this call. She's our emerging leader. She's leading that charge. That's not age required. We have Shar Rivas, who is also one of our leaders that does the work with commissioners. There are organizational, institutional kind of subcommittees that you can join, and don't feel intimidated. We need your help. We need your help. You can learn, anything can be learned. You just have to commit to it. And then from there, I can guarantee that there will be an opportunity for you to join some of this work and to build, and we will ask you to step up, and you will have that opportunity to lead, and we look forward to it. So, what I'm hearing from them is don't kind of wave in, dive in. There's an opportunity here, and don't be afraid that there's something that you're not going to know. You're going to learn Robert's Rule of Order. You're going to be at the BOG meetings like Sunny and Andy and I are. And, half the time I would sit by a guy named Lowell Kruger, and he would be like, hey, watch this. And because he knew like a conversation was going to happen at the BOG from some guy on the East Coast and some guy from the Midwest. But what I came out learning is not only process, but everyone's as messed up as we are. So, that's just what it is. So feel free, to reach out to us. And so with our time left, I'm going to ask a couple more questions. Then I'm going to open it up to the participants to ask Sunny and Andy questions directly. What I ask you to do is put your name in the chat, and we will just go through the chat, and I will call on you to ask your question so not everyone's talking at once. As soon as I'm done with this final question with them, I want to open it up to all of the attendees. Put your name in the chat, and we will ask you to ask your question, and it's going to be to Sunny and Andy, but this is the final question that I have for them. And I'm going to start with President Shaw. And my final question to you all is, what are your words of wisdom? Like, what hard truths do these attendees need to know? What do you see the future holding in the times of social unrest, in the times of the pandemic, in the times of the economic downturn? And how can they continue to build? Just give them a word of encouragement and hope. Let them know that you see them. So Sunny, I'm going to start with you, President Shaw.
Sure. So I'm going to break that into a couple of things, Cupid. First, I'm going to go to what do we see, right? And so what I think, the pandemic, I think we're going to see more folks working from home. Economics, I think we're going to see a downturn. I think that, we've been pretty blessed the last couple of years with good budgets, but I think that that's going to become a real challenge, especially with the money that's had to be expended because of CARES and the heroes or the heals, whatever it will be called next. We need to advocate, because I think we're going to see an economic downturn. And then with the social unrest, gosh, I'm sure hoping we see some policy change. We need policy change. There are still agencies out there, and if you're one of them, I'm going to ask you to go back and have a conversation with your board, but there are still agencies out there that have like a 20-year look back period. I want to say, are you kidding me? Didn't we all do something 20 years ago that we don't like discussed out in public? And so why should we be having a 20-year look back? It's not required by HUD. You can set that in your agency. So there's policies that I'm really hoping that these social conversations work to change policy at the local, at the state, and at the national level. And we've got some great folks on this call that are going to be helping to lead that charge. So those are the things that I kind of see as the going forward environment that we're going to be in, Cupid. And finally, what's the hard truth that everyone should know? Not everybody's going to believe in you. That's a hard truth, but it's real. Not everybody's going to believe in you. But if you believe in you and you keep working, you can find a way and walk down this path and do this work and become the leader that you're meant to be. Find a mentor that believes in you. People at your agency don't have to believe in you. Your uncle doesn't have to believe in you. Find a mentor who's going to believe in you at the same level that you believe in you. And I believe in you. I think that you can do this, and we need more strong, passionate leaders. So join us. Just join us.
Thank you for that, President Shaw. Andy?
Well, I'd like to say that, you have to be your own best cheerleader. We're taught in society, don't brag about yourself, don't be such a braggart, that sort of thing. But there are things that you need to brag about when it comes to what you're doing as an agency. And if you feel like you're the best at something, then let others know about it. The PNRC newsletter is a great way to showcase what you're doing, but also a great way to get opportunities to find what other people are doing that's innovative, that you can take back to your agency and say, we can implement this. Like if that 142 unit agency is able to implement a wellness program for mental health and for physical health, why can't we? But PNR, the newsletter is a great thing for that. And again, don't feel like you made it to the top, because just when you think you did, you're not at the top. And I reflect back on my in boot camp, in Marine Corps boot camp. There was a part of it that we had to do a 21-mile hike overnight, and part of it was a mountain, and I won't say the name of it because it is very vulgar. But that mountain I've taken to be just like life. You'd climb up one part of it, and as you'd get to the summit of it, you felt like, okay, I'm here. But then you'd look, and there was another, and then there was another, and there was another. And finally, you got to the top. But it's when you think you're at the top that you got to realize you're not. Whether it's the top of your game, if that's in golf, or whether it's the top of your game when it comes to the work you do and where you're trying to lead an organization like Nahro, just don't give up. And when people tell you, I'm going to push back on that, I like to tell them, I push back too.
I'm pushing back on Andy right now. So you all, we still have a couple minutes. We don't usually get these two together. So I would love to open this up, but I'm going to call on a few people. I'm going to call on Vanessa. Vanessa Sanchez, you put a question in the chat. I would like you to ask that question, the first part of the question, if you don't mind.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you. First I want to kudos to you guys. I have been so engaged in this call the whole time. And I know I'm not the only one on the call, but I feel like you're speaking directly to me this whole time. And that just speaks to the dynamics of your personality and the way that you're keeping us all engaged. So to my question, we also in Central Oregon, we have a small housing authority, not as small as yours, Andy, but compared to some of the others in this region. And what do you recommend? And Simon, you answered this a lot with just being a leader and being ready for the opportunity when it comes, and it might not be in the housing authority. But what do you recommend to try to advance when there's not a lot of room for advancement?
Yeah, I completely get that. I know that my staff are frustrated with that too, and they look for other opportunities. But here's what I say: there's two types of separations from an agency. There's a good one and a bad one. Now, the good one has a little bit of different reasons why they're good. The bad one is we know what that is. But separation from an agency doesn't mean that that's a negative thing. I remember Rebecca, who was an MSW, who was working in my accounting department as an accounting tech. And she got approached by some friends of hers that were in law enforcement who were trying to build this crazy thing called the Nampa Family Justice Center, a place where victims of domestic violence and sexual assault could come to like a one-stop shop. They were replicating something that happened, or an organization that came about in San Diego County and little old Nampa, Idaho. And so she said, Andy, they're approaching me because she wrote grants too. She says, because they know about my grant writing skills and they're wondering if I could apply or if I could help them write the grant. And I said, I will absolutely give you my blessing and give you as much time as you need during the day to do this. Because she had said, I'll work weekends, evenings, whatever. And I said, no. You have a family. You'll work daytime and you'll help write that grant and let somebody else kind of look at the note or look at the draft and give you, some more stuff to add into it. But here's the only caveat. You can only do it if you write yourself in as the executive director. So I recognized her talent, but recognized there was nothing I could give her at my agency that would help me. So as a result, the Nampa Family Justice Center and she became their director. And a side note, bear in mind, I'm always a selfish son of a gun. I wanted to have a really good hearing officer who understood housing. And so I said, you got to write yourself into that too. So she did that. But there are times where it is frustrating and you recognize that I can't move up in this organization anymore. Like for my staff that I have currently, I only have one family self-sufficiency coordinator. I only have one service coordinator. I only have one of pretty much every position except for my maintenance team. And I recognize that I can't help them move up within the organization. But if I get them out in the community enough and I make my staff, even the most introverted ones, be part of community organizations, whether it's a YCAP or it's the Homelessness Coordinating Committee or the Housing Coalition, or even some of the service clubs, making them get out there in the community is going to give them the opportunity to meet a whole bunch of other people that are going to be able to advance their careers. Case in point, one of my maintenance guys is in Leadership Nampa, which is held by the Chamber of Commerce. Now, why would I send a maintenance guy to that? What good is that going to do him? Well, first of all, he's 27 years old, so he's got his whole career ahead of him. And I want him to be my guy when my maintenance supervisor decides to retire, that he be himself prepared for that by going and knowing people out in the community that are already going to be connections for him. And then if I can't keep him because he doesn't want to wait 8, 9, 10 years when the other gentleman's going to retire, I at least know that I built an ally out there in our community that when the naysayers that Sonny was talking about, the NIMBYism people, the people that say you should pull yourself up by your bootstraps when you ain't got no boots in the first place, that I'm gonna have somebody out there in the community who's saying, wait a minute, you think the Napa Housing Authority is like that, but they are nothing like that. I know because I work there. So that's the kind of separations I like to see if I can't build them within my own organization.
Sonny, your thoughts?
Yeah, absolutely. So Andy and I think so much alike, and it's probably because we grew up together, but it really is about giving leadership opportunity and experience. My agency also doesn't have a lot of room for growth from my team, although I have a team with great potential. So I want them out in the community. I want them serving on boards. I want them becoming leaders in the community. If they leave me someday, then we've got allies in the community. But if they don't leave me, they may be prepared for opportunity down the road. And so, yeah, there's not a lot of movement in our agency. That doesn't mean, Vanessa, you don't want to be preparing yourself for opportunity, because it may come knocking, and heaven forbid you not be for it.
Right. Thank you for that, Sonny. I want to put a last call out. If you have any questions, feel free to either put your name in the chat or message me directly. We have about 14 minutes. We will not take time we do not need. So I am a big fan of not wasting time. If I do not see anything within the next minute, we're going to cut this a little bit short, so give you some breathing room. I do want to say a couple of things. First of all, thank you, Sonny, and thank you, Andy, for being a part of this conversation. This is the second, this is probably like our 5th or 6th time doing this, but this is the second time in 2 years where I've asked for them to come be a part of this, and they have always stepped up to the plate. It's a great example of leadership. And I know that they're looking for the next set of leaders. I know because they keep asking me to do stuff. and I think there's enough space for all y'all to come join me. We got space on the team. Let's see here. Michelle has a question. Great question, Michelle. Would you like to state your question? You can just unmute yourself and ask your question to Sonny and then to Andy. Go ahead, Michelle.
It really wasn't a question. It was more of an appreciative nature. I've been in housing for about 3 years now, and I have a background in the insurance industry. So I could tell you all kinds of things about health insurance, car insurance, life insurance, just let me know. But I've really been limited to my 4 walls and not understanding the industry. And as a first timer to this conference, I want to thank you so much for letting me know that there is much more out there, and I can build something more than just what I've been doing where I'm at. So I just wanted to say thank you.
Thank you.
Michelle, yes.
Michelle,
Go ahead.
I just want to throw in there that, yeah, there's so much more than the 4 walls, because even if you're not traveling, you still have the opportunity for advocacy and to make a name for yourself, okay? There was a point when I remember Senator Crapo talking to Secretary Carson when he was first being sworn or approved to be Secretary of HUD. And, there were folks over in one corner that were like, hey, we've got this in the bag. We've got Crapo's ear, da-da-da-da. And then he led with his conversation of being like, I just want you to know I'm in favor of taking care of small agencies. Where do you stand with small agencies? And it completely threw a curveball to everybody that was in that room. And what ended up happening was afterwards, our Nahro team in DC, people were coming up and saying, where is Pocatello, Idaho? What in the world? Where did this come from? Because they began to realize he'd been hearing from my team and I so much that what we were saying was resonating and coming out in his questions for testimony. So even if you aren't allowed to serve nationally, get engaged with Nahro. Find out what your member ID number is. Log in, read the blogs, learn, educate yourself on our issues, because it's only going to make you better at what you do and make you more valuable for your agency.
Andy, anything to add?
We've all been first timers, and I thank you for being brave enough to mention that, because a lot of folks wouldn't. But I'll bet there's somebody else or somebody else's on here who's a first timer and not sure, like, who are my allies and who are the people I turn to get help. I've posted my email and my phone number on the chat thing, and I just see that Sonny just did the same. And that's who you call. And the day that we stop becoming available to the first timers is the day we need to step aside. Because I remember at that national conference, that standing against a wall, pretty much sitting there going, wow, look at all these people interact. And I know not one of them. And then having a person who became a dear friend of mine, who was standing there too, turned out we're both vets. So that was an automatic bond, who we're able to say, hey, this is my first time. Do you know anybody? No. Do you? No. Well, let's go have a beer. And then you become a friend. And I'm not telling y'all to go drink or anything. I'm just saying there's a lot more first timers out there. And in a normal conference, we would have had a first time attendee sort of get together so you know who you are. And I'm sad that we weren't or aren't going to be able to necessarily do that in person. But that's where you start to build your friendships and where you start to build your network, both locally and nationally. So call on me if you have any questions. I'll be happy to help.
Andy and Sunny, thank you for that. We will not take any more questions, just a few housekeeping things. Vanessa Sanchez, will you put your email address in the chat for those of you who are looking for an opportunity and you would like to join what we are doing in Nahro, and you just started or you're just new to the organization and you want to get in, please get in contact with Vanessa. She's leading our work with our emerging leaders, and that has no age description at all. Anyone who wants to move into leadership or sees themselves as a leader, even if you have to self-identify yourself as a leader because no one's empowered you to do that, please get in contact with us. We will put you to work tomorrow. You will have the opportunities to build your skill set. And frankly, some of the work that I've done, I've used on my resume because it was the only opportunity I had, so I took it. And I was able to show that I was able to be strategic and able to conduct meetings, and I had practical knowledge. The other thing is that now that I get to go to nationals with most of the national conferences, we usually roll as a Pacific Northwest group. So you'll never be alone. I remember there were a couple people on this call who my first time at Capitol Hill just dragged me along, and I went with the Oregon contingent to meet the senators and meet their staff. And this was prior to me being in the role that I'm in now. So I want to be sure. So you have the information on the right. Please be sure to write that down. We're going to go ahead and dismiss. Thank you all for being a part of this.
Thank you.
And goodbye.
And Cupid, that was the best letter I ever wrote. Goodbye, all.
Good job, guys. Take care.